All right.
Are we on air?
Mm-hmm.
Says we
All
are.
right. I didn't get the countdown. Anyways, so Never Settle podcast number 2. We made it. We made it past the first one. Um, Last time we were talking about what it looks like to be in relation with Father and His will for our lives, and how so many times He has something so much bigger than what we planned, um, and we miss it because we're looking for a formula or a science, and really the only way to find out His perfect will for us that usually is way bigger and better than anything we can imagine is by walking in that relationship and really understanding, because a lot of His paths are unconventional or they seem uncertain even though they're solid ground. And this week we all watched a really neat podcast about truth or tradition, and the author quoted something from the Barna Group that kind of blew all of our minds. And so I just want to open it up with this quote and just kind of go from there. But the Barna Group says, the problem facing the Christian church is not that people lack a complete set of beliefs. The problem is that they have a full slate of beliefs in mind which they think are consistent with biblical teachings, and they are neither open to being proven wrong nor to learning new insights. It may well be that spiritual evaluation is so uncommon because people fear that the results might suggest the need for different growth strategies or for more aggressive engagement in the growth process. No matter what the underlying reason is, the bottom line amount both the clergy and laity was indifference towards their acknowledgement lack of evaluation. And I feel it's just really interesting to see the Barna Group bring that forward and recognize that just this, I think it's an innate desire as us and humans to want more of a religion-type based relationship versus uncertain relational day-to-day kind of walk with Father. And it was just really interesting. I feel like that ties really well into what we were talking about last week and just what Father's calling all of us to.
Yeah, it does sound like formula. It sounds like autopilot. I mean, can you guys, Shaw, do you relate to that at all and think through the course of your life, your testimony? What cycles have you gone through? Have there been periods where, that resonates with you? It's like, hey, I've got this thing figured out. I'm on autopilot. I'm good with God. Can keep going. And then what times have you felt like, no, something wasn't right? There was a gap and you knew there was more. Do you feel like you've had both in your life, or what? Like, I'm curious about your testimony in that
Uh,
respect.
Absolutely both. And like when I first heard that quote, I was like, wow, that was me definitely 5 years ago, and me in a different respect 2 years ago, and even some today. And like I think, especially when you put any time into like study or all that, and you get something, you grab something, the Lord shows you something, or even sometimes I, I think sometimes you'll get something that's like true, and you'll get excited and you'll run with it, and you're like, you believe it, and like you're like, this is it. And then if that ever becomes challenged, like I think the part that really stood out to me was, let me find it, like, just neither being open to being proven wrong nor learning new insights. Like I think that's like a huge thing in my own life and the people around me's lives. Like I think it's a lot easier for people to, just grasp on what they learned at one time or whatever, instead of like constantly evolving their understanding and pursuing truth. And it's just like I don't know. I have a few like teachers or like podcast guys that I listen to, and it's interesting because you'll hear something from them and they'll teach on something, and he's like, you know what, you need to really go figure this out, read the Bible, and like learn what it is like for yourself, because when you come back in a year, like I may be in a different spot because the Lord corrected me or showed me something clear, so like I just think people get stuck in a rut, and they in a comfort zone, and they don't want to change, and it's scary. And there's lots of stuff like that right now that I'm learning that I'm just like, wow. Like even this talk, I heard this quote on, is this Jim Staley talk about, it's called Truth or Tradition, and it's all about like holidays, Easter and Christmas specifically, and just like where they came from, and how like how they were formed and how like we got Christmas or Easter, and like how that differs from maybe like back in, the disciples and how they celebrated things, or if they celebrated things, and what the Lord wants you to celebrate. And like, so I actually went into that talk because I've heard some of it from Ken and you and other sources as well, and I went into that saying, you know what, I don't really want to listen to this talk at all. Like, I really don't, because I'm afraid of what I will learn and what I might be responsible for like after that. And it's much easier just to be like, no, man, that's wrong. Like, I've got my belief system in place. I've done it this way forever. And I think that's one of the hardest things, is when you have something in place for so long and it's challenged and you're like, like, it's different? Are you kidding me? Like, or whatever. It's a lot easier to not challenge it.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about, just that fear piece, like there's this reluctance um, to diving in because of the fear of being proven wrong, to learning new insights. And so it's interesting that you brought that up, because this week I was having a really cool conversation with one of my friends, Mike, who you guys both know, and we were talking about a book that he just read called The Paradigm Shift, or it was something about the paradigm shift, and we were diving into people's paradigms, and basically that when you present, and it doesn't have to be biblical-based truth, but when you present something that would prove something incorrect or false in their paradigm, how they see life and what they've structured it around, it's so detrimental to the foundation that they've built their life on that they immediately will reject it most of the time, because they'll reject it immediately because because the consequences of believing that will shatter everything that they've built their life on. And so I think we see this in biblical-based truths, but any kind of truths where you build your paradigm around people, we kind of get set in our ways and we don't want to choose to change them. And even if it's black and white truth, and we know it is, there's almost like a neurological subset of actions that happens in our brain that we can't handle the idea of having everything that we've built our lives on shatter. And so I think that's this they're neither open to being proven wrong nor to learning new insights. I don't think it's necessarily even a personal choice where someone goes into it and it's like, I don't want to learn anything new. I think their heart is, but there's this almost a neurological reaction at the base, of their thought process that just, it's too overwhelming to even consider.
And that's the interesting paradox, because I think, most people would say, if you ask them, do you want all the truth? Well, they would say, sure, absolutely. I don't think anybody would say, no, I want to mix all my truth with falsehood, and I want to have this hodgepodge. But the thing that you're getting at, the crazy part of it is that as we grow, I think we define our identity so much by what we believe. And so a lot of these things we've got, I know in my walk, like in my life, I've been reinvented several times by Father peeling layers back and stripping away things from me that I thought were a part of myself. But when I was able to finally see them clearly lined up against, the ultimate yardstick of Scripture, they didn't match. They didn't line up. And so when I had to say, is that really who I am? I had to say, no, like, that's not what I want to be. But that is painful. Now you've got a mode of thought, you've got decisions, your past decisions. Repentance comes in huge, because you realize I did all these things that I thought were okay, that I thought I was doing the right thing, and here I wasn't. And that, if we're not humble, and if we don't want our Creator's perspective more than our own perspective, you're right. Like, neurologically, we're just going to immediately reject something that doesn't line up with this kind of reality bubble that we've created for ourselves. And it just compounds with relationships, because every decision we make, every new truth we see, if we really grab a hold of it, it ripples out into all of our relationships. And that's where it really gets painful too. It's interesting. It's interesting. But I think that, the amazing thing to me, again, it's driving all the way back to relationship. It's like, if you got married and your relationship with your wife froze, at the moment you got married, and you never grew closer after that, you know, you would have a formula. You would have like, okay, I've got this person figured out. Now I'm just going to do this stuff for the rest of my life, and she's going to be happy. But that's completely unrealistic. That makes no sense. And the beauty of the relationship with Father, I mean, he's an infinite person. He's an infinite being, and so we could never possibly learn everything there is to know about what he wants, and the detail to which he pours that relationship back into us, like this thing right here, boop, in the background, that's a rainbow vacuum cleaner, and my wife loves those things. We had one in Virginia, and so we get to this house that we're moving into, and they're selling all their stuff, and that's sitting there, and she's like, oh my goodness, like, because my son has allergies and stuff, and this is like water based, so it does an amazing job at that, and they may be selling it, and we may be able to buy that, and they're like, you can hardly find them anymore. But like, that's the detail to which Father, communicates with us and relates to us, and to try to put that in a religious box of just being closed to what he wants, reading the Bible through and thinking we've got him figured out, and then saying, okay, I'm going to worship you my way, my time, and fit you into my schedule. That just doesn't work. And the minute we start doing that, our relationship with him starts dying. And just like a garden, if you don't get out there and weed, if you don't, water and fertilize and do all that, it's just going to die. And,
yeah. You said humility, and I think, man, that's so needed and so hard and so powerful. But because the opposite of humility is pride, right? And naturally we're prideful beings, and I see pride flare up in my own life at so many times, and it's and I feel like pride, it's the opposite of humility. The pride is what is preventing us from wanting to know what God's will is. Our Creator, the Creator of the universe, puts breath in our lungs, allows us to wake up every morning, and really saying, what I'm going to submit to Him. This fear of Yahweh, the fear of the Lord. But we build up our own set of beliefs in our mind, and I think we're prideful to think that just because they've produced fruit in our life, they make us feel good, or they've resonated with us, that they obviously have to be truth. And I feel like that's a really prideful thing, and it's not being humble to say, okay, I want to approach I want to test and approve everything, because this is the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. He has my eternal judgment in His hands. Like, it's really important that I really know this, and I'm willing to dive in instead of just hear something once and take it as solid truth. And that's so hard. I don't think anybody goes out thinking they're prideful, but when you look at, when I look at my own heart, what were the things that prevent me from wanting to challenge my own beliefs and stuff, and just say, no, my intentions were good, or I've used this, like your example about, you ask your son to do, Andrew, you ask your son to do one thing, and instead he does another good chore. It doesn't really matter. You asked him to do the thing that you asked him to do because that's what you asked him to do, and it doesn't really matter if he wants to do something just to try to be good. It's about obedience. And I think we just get a lot of pride in there, thinking like, well, I can do anything in the name of God because my heart is for Jesus, or it's for Messiah. But I don't think that God, when I look at what the scriptures say, and Messiah himself, it's a very high standard, and I don't think he says, go do whatever you want and just say it in my name, and all is good.
Yeah, and that word good is interesting too, and even the word fruit. Like, it's always fascinating when people use those terms, good and fruit, even together. And I think about, the scriptures tell us that, even the enemy can do miracles, like good miracles, heal people and things like that. And there, we see that clearly. And so it's interesting to think about the possibility that, there's a teaching of disobedience that's accompanied by miracles and things that people would call good fruit. It's like, oh wow, look at all this good stuff that's happening. They must have truth. But the interesting thing about that is we're told to test that, and the test for what is truth is not good things happening. That's not the test. The test for truth is, does it line up with the whole word of Yah, with the whole word? and we forget that because it's easy for us. We're so tuned materialistically and with our five senses. We're so tuned to react to things that have an appearance of goodness.
Yeah, peel back. I love that you just said the whole word. Peel that back.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we were just talking before this about labels, and even the labels, Old Testament, New Testament, bother me, like, because it implies that one is less applicable than the other. And if you think about it, at the time of the disciples, they only had one word of God, and that was the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament at the time. And so we're blessed to have their experiences captured in their letters and all of that. But I think there's an incredible gap that we are discovering that we have, and this gap is all the centuries of church doctrine and teaching that basically tried to, and really when you look at it at face value, you see the enemy's hand all over it, because here's a whole 2/3 of the book, the law, the prophets, and the writings, that basically was written off for centuries, and people, it's harsh to say that most of the church wrote it off. The church would never say that. Obviously, the church would say, well, yeah, it's good for a history lesson. It's good for some examples. Maybe David has got a couple good stories. Noah's a good story, but really, as a belief community, we've kind of, for centuries, we haven't taken those earlier writings and said, how do we live by these? Like, is there not value to structure our life? And we know Malachi says, Yah doesn't change, and so how can we get to Malachi and read, God doesn't change, and then throw away the first 2/3 of what he already did throughout human history? It just makes no sense.
But in that testing and approving, like you said, to the whole word, one of our conversations that we've had before was looking and finding God repeats his stories and his truths throughout the word from the beginning, from Genesis to Revelation. There's a repetitive story, and the main story, I think, is redemption and his love for his people. But within that, he's teaching lessons all the time. And so I think, like you said, it's so important to, if we base something on truth and we try to test and put to the word, that we find what the whole Bible says about that, not just one verse or even a few verses, but what the whole Bible says about that. And I think it's difficult. It's not easy, although we have more resources provided to us right now than like any believer ever on the planet. So it's exponentially easier for us than it's been for any group of believers before. But it's time-consuming. It takes putting your own belief on the line, and it takes diligence and obedience and seeking the Father's will. But it's so critical to see what the whole Word says. And one time, a while ago, Andrew, you were speaking to me, and you were talking about, a lot of people will be like, well, the Bible contradicts itself. So what if I'm seeking truth, and I want to find out, I want to test and approve it, I want to see what the whole Bible says, but I come to scriptures that contradict themselves. And I love that you said, Yah never changes, because he doesn't, and he definitely doesn't contradict himself, right? He is truth, and so he doesn't contradict himself. And so what's really cool about that, as you encouraged me one time, if I ever see something that I think is a contradiction, that immediately is a flag that I either missed something or the interpretation, something happened there, because God does not contradict himself. If we believe all the things that God says about himself, we would absolutely know that he's not going to contradict himself. So there's something that we're missing. And so that even is just a great kind of cue into studying the Word of, hey, I'm missing something. This is a great place for me to understand something new that I may be missing. But absolutely think it's so critical, and I find myself, not being diligent in that and looking at what the whole Word says. And I just love it when people build foundational truths in their lives, and they know throughout, many different places in the Bible where it supports that truth, and they have a holistic understanding of what the Word says about that. And man, that's just something I feel like we should all be diving into, taking every piece of truth and looking at A to Z. What is God saying about this?
Yeah, I think that's really, really good. Like, you do have to approach it as a whole, and I think one of the things that trips people up, has tripped me up a ton, is like thinking that I'm going to get it really quickly like, it's the world we live in, right? Like, let's have it right now. Let's understand everything. Like, I can understand this 100%, and then I'm good, like, for the rest of my life. Kind of like that quote says, like, people just, they soak it in, they suck it up, and then they're just like, yeah, that's it, got it, and they, like, I've been in that spot where I've been challenged on something that, like, I kind of got that way, and then I'm like, uh-oh, like, I actually was wrong, and here's why, and then, like, gaining that holistic, like, picture of the Bible, and really, like, getting a full understanding. It takes time, and it's okay that it takes time, and you're not going to get it. It's a process. Like, I have a stack of videos, books, like my Bible that, like, if I started right now, I'm talking about years to get through, like, all this and really understand it and put it together, and, like, lots of these new concepts, like even all this stuff, watching a Jim Staley video, or I hear from you guys, like, I am right in the middle of the testing and approving, and, like, being like, okay, is this what God says? And, like, I need to pray about it more, and, like, really ask the Lord to show me what's going on in the Bible, instead of just, like, reading it. Or when you hear something, like, yeah, like, at first I was listening to some of this stuff and I was like, wow, like, I don't like that, or that's really challenging, or that's challenging something that I've believed my whole life, and I'm not sure I want to go that route, which, just that whole mentality is weird anyways. Like, I started off wrong. And so, like, when my train of thought just left. Anyways, like, if you're not, like, praying it through and, like, realizing that it's going to take some time and you're going to change, and it's, I don't know, like, you have to do that, or you're just going to be stuck in the same spot, or whatever, or you're going to get to a point where, usually where I get when I'm not involving the Lord is, like, I'll start studying or doing something, trying to understand something, and I get to the point that, like, there's so much there that I just get overwhelmed and end up quitting, because I'm just like, I'm never going to understand it all. I'm never going to be able to, like, put the puzzle together, and it's because I left God out of, like, that equation. I didn't ask him to help me do it.
Yeah.
And so it became a dangerous thing, like, pretty quick. And even though, like, even like what you were saying, like, doing things for the Lord, like, just because I'm reading my Bible, if I'm looking for something for me, like, it's a lot different than, like, being like, okay, God, like, show me what you said, not what I want to hear, and, like, try to formulate, with those couple verses or whatever. And so, I don't know, it's like, it's really challenging,
I want to zoom in. You said a couple really great things there, and I want to zoom into two of them in particular. One of them was, when you leave God out of it, when you try to do it intellectually, and that's, I think, one of the biggest traps. I mean, the Pharisees, for example, they had an intellectual brilliance about the law. They knew in and out. But even throughout the law, the Torah, there were so many prophecies of Messiah. Everything in the Torah points forward to Messiah, and yet they, for the most part, most of them completely missed him. So they had this complete intellectual mastery of this system, and they should have recognized it immediately, but they didn't, because it was intellectual. So that was the number one thing. The number two thing was time. You said it takes time, and I think we have a handicap when it comes to time. And I think the handicap is we've inherited an academic system, a fundamental approach to information that is very intellectual, and relationship is not intellectual. It takes time. And if you think about going back, rewind a few thousand years, and think about how occupations worked, and how sons would inherit their father's trade or business, and they would apprentice with their dad, and they would learn that entire livelihood by living with their dad, following him day to day, like exploring what he did, watching what he did, and he would teach them along the way. And now we have more of a much Greco-Roman form of education where, here's all the information, here's a bunch of books, go learn it, memorize it, and you know it. Well, you think about trying to be a blacksmith or a carpenter or any of these kind of professions and trades by reading a bunch of books. You're gonna have no context for that. You're not gonna know what the definitions mean. The book's gonna refer to something, and your brain is gonna say, what does that look like? What does that feel like? How does that fit? What are its properties? There's no experiential learning there. And I think what we've done with religion is we've taken it to an intellectual place, and we think that we can read through the Word, we think we can figure it out, and we think that we can get our spirit in a place that's ready for eternity. But intellectually, it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen, and that's where the relationship kicks in. And relationship takes a lot of time, and it's a slow process. You don't learn welding, by just grabbing the tools and making it happen. It's not instantaneous. And I think one of the things that I've been experiencing in my life is like a restoration of getting back to kind of the way a father would teach his son. Like, my Heavenly Father is so patient with me. He lets me make mistakes. I make those mistakes, but then he turns them into lessons, and I've got an option. I can internalize that lesson and do better the next time, or I can just say, no, that doesn't fit with my reality. I'm going back to the way I like to do things. So it's fascinating, but I think that handicap is one we have to overcome, where we've got to get past the intellectual side and press into the relational side.
Mm-hmm. The time is so hard to understand, and I mean, it makes so much sense when we talk about it like this, but living in it, there's just that urgency. And I'm going to bring it right back to the pride thing. I was reading, I'm going through Battlefield of the Mind right now with Joyce Meyer, and she was talking about pride, and it was one of the Israelites' wilderness mentalities is what she calls it. And she was saying that a prideful person or an impatient person is a prideful person, because you're so prideful that you believe you should have it now, instead of this humble approach to this is taking time. And so I think we all struggle with that. Naturally, I think Western culture, or anything that came out of Greek, Roman culture, is naturally inflated to have a higher pressure on instant gratification. We see that in every aspect of our life right now, even from how our food's produced to how it's prepared. I mean, just instantaneously we expect everything, and I think we apply that to our thoughts and our relationship with God. And what I want to jump in here was, I feel like so many people know this verse, but we don't take it literally, and I feel like that's so many times where I've seen it in my own life where God or Yeshua says something, and I just kind of take it for granted, or how I want to interpret it, but I don't really take it for what it says. And it's just funny because there's a lot of times where there's really famous verses, which I don't think there should be a famous verse or an unfamous, but there is, and so many people miss it. But Philippians 1:6 says, and this is Messiah talking, it says, being persuaded of this, that he who has begun a good work in you shall perfect it until the day of Yahushua Messiah. And that's till he is coming back. So Messiah is talking about him coming back, and he's saying that God is literally going to be working on us from now, and this is to the early beliefs. So for those people, it started 2,000 years ago, right? But he's going to be working on us basically until we die, and there is no landing point. So if we don't have that timeline perspective, even though our life is just a mist here, we're here and we're gone, and it's so quick on the eternal scale of time. Our entire lives are a learning process, and if we ever get stuck in something and we think we've come to a destination, we've automatically missed it, I think. And I think Messiah, this is what he's talking about, where he's saying, know this. Like, it's also an encouragement, right? I think everyone's excited about growth naturally, but sometimes when we go through it, we don't want to go through it. But the idea of it, we're all excited about, and he's encouraging us, saying he's going to continue working in us all the way until he returns, and that's exciting, but there's a lot of truth there. That means we're going to continually get refined, right? We're going to keep going in the fire, and more layers are going to be coming off, and more layers, and that process, while it's exciting and we come out more pure on the other side, it's never exciting to be in the fire. Mm-hmm. And so that's just one of those verses I feel like we all, I shouldn't say we all, I'm generalizing, but I've maybe even taken for granted in the past, and then when I take it really literally and I try to read it face value, I'm just kind of taken back, like, wow, that's a big statement.
Yeah, I like this idea of welding for some reason. Like, it's highlighted to me. Like, so okay, like quiet times or studying or reading the word or whatever, you like lots of times I just read a bunch of stuff or like watch the next video and stuff, and like I don't take time for like feedback from the Lord. I don't take time to listen, and like where I'm gonna tie this into welding is like, I mean, same idea, right? Like you put the metal in the fire, you put it on the what's it called, the iron thing. Anyways, you put it on the iron, you smack that thing, and then bam, you're gonna get some type of feedback. Something's gonna happen to the metal, and it's gonna take new shape and stuff. And you might have to hit it a couple times, and then there might be something that like, oh, we gotta go put it back in the fire so I can shape this part. And I'm gonna shape this part, and then I'm gonna cool it, and then I'm gonna put it back and stuff. And but there's like, I guess what I'm getting at is like sometimes I forget to listen, and it's just like I'm expecting that I'm gonna hit this piece of metal over and over and over, and like, or even just hit it once, and I'm gonna have a sword or something like that. And it's like there's no time for like the feedback, and lots of times that's what I leave out of my personal like pursuit of the King is like I'll do all this stuff and I'll forget to listen, or I'll be so focused on the end product and understanding that I miss out on like the detail and like the cool things that happen to make it and get it where it is, or like the tricks or like the intricate just whatever it might be, and it's because I wasn't listening or paying attention.
Yeah, and how many times do they fold those Japanese swords? They're like layers and layers and layers, and they're doing it, and that's where the strength comes from, too. And if you just take that, you heat it up, you pound on it a couple times, it's not, you're going to have just a useless chunk of metal. And you said a couple brilliant things, both of you, to connect all the dots and sort of thread the needle. Jumping right back to what Ken said in terms of contradiction. And I think this is where, when we're rushing things, like you're talking about, Shaw, when you rush through stuff, you miss what's there. And I've done it a million times. I'll read a chapter, I'll read a verse, I'll read a book, and then I'll do it again, same place, but I'll actually be going slow enough, and I'll say, wait a minute, either that's not what I've been taught, or wait a minute, or this sounds like it contradicts something I read somewhere else. And that's the key to catching those moments. And I think both scenarios is where we really, the quote we read at the beginning talks about basically avoiding growth, like not submitting to a process that encourages and fosters and maintains growth. And rushing through is part of that equation. And when we slow down, we retain more, for one thing, but the other thing we always need to be constantly asking ourselves as we're reading is like, is this what I already believe, or have I heard differently? Have I been taught differently? Or is there somewhere else in the Word that it sounds like there's a question here? Because I don't know. I mean, even Romans, like if you just read Romans front to back, Romans seems to be internally contradictory to itself, because it will say things like, by no works can any flesh be justified, but then it'll also say, by works of the law, flesh will be justified. And it'll say both things in the same book. And we typically like skim over that, and we're like, wait a minute. If we pause and wait and say, wait, those are logically, in our language, logically opposites. But when you reconcile against the whole Word, there's a consistency. We just have inadequate translations, inadequate understanding, and that's where, like you were saying, Shaw, we have to have Yahweh involved in our learning. I mean, imagine like throwing your kid a math book and saying, figure this out, learn how to do, here, figure this trigonometry stuff out, without a teacher, and so there's a teacher, and we miss that. Like the Holy Spirit is our teacher, and we have the promise that the Holy Spirit will teach us all truth. And so it's both, and we need that input as we go.
Yeah. Well, I think we already touched on it a little bit, but yeah, just the whole idea of so many times I just want to finish, I want to know the next thing, I want to understand it. Yeah. And like I had when we were on the road a lot, we played a camp almost every year, and once in a while, like, we'd get the same speakers, and so we came to know this one speaker. His name's Jeremy Kingsley, and he always said this to the kids, and like I loved it. I soaked it in, but he's like, when you read the Bible, you read to change, you don't read to finish. And like, so it's so easy for me to be like, oh, I'm gonna read the Bible like all the way through, or I'm gonna read this thing, or like I want to get through that video so that I can check it off, or either say, yep, I'm with that, or no, I'm not, and then it's the next thing. And so I don't know, like, I think forgetting to like just involve the King and realize like it's actually a really cool journey,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we want the diploma, but it's not about the diploma. It's it's about the relationship. Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a great illustration in love these books. I've told you guys about them before, but the Kingdom series by I think the author is Jeff Black, if I remember correctly. And at one point in the story, there's it's like 14 books. It's this crazy long series. But at one point in the series, one of the main characters he basically dies. He's like defeated by this enemy, and he thinks he's gonna die. He's pierced through his abdomen, stabbed to the ground basically. And he wakes up later. He finds out that he was rescued by this old man, but he just thinks, and he had a ton of pride, like lots of pride issues. And so in his perspective, this old man is just an old, barely mobile guy who he was grateful that he saved him, but he was of no value to this knight as he sees himself, And over the period of their relationship, he nurses him back to health, and he gets back to health, and he starts to train him a little bit in certain ways, and then as he grows and learns, the old man changes and he starts shifting. Eventually, when he goes through this entire process and his he's finally humbled, he realizes like it was Messiah. And he almost didn't realize it until the very end. But here the King was nursing him back to health in person, and he just thought it was some old guy, And I think we have this. It's very easy for us to cling to human teachers because they're here, they're physical, they're tangible. But Father wants that same level of intimacy with us and that same direct connection to us, and we can have it if we're able to and willing to shut down the pride, eliminate the distractions, and go through that process of reconnecting to Him. And it's a terrifying thing, but it's an incredible thing at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I feel fairly distant from that, but that's the destination. Hopefully, that's where I want to be.
Yeah, it's interesting too because He'll change with us, and He'll force us to change. And I mean, if we're seeking Him on a very intimate relational level, that's going to look different, possibly day to day, as well as seasonally in our lives. And we were hanging out with another couple, and we were just talking about just how Megan and I, our quiet time is really changing all the time, and it's looking so much different in it. We were challenged by that to really seek, what does God have for me today? And as we did that, we realized that He started changing things, and there were things that we were doing where we'd get really good truths and intimacy and just revelation from Father and just feeling His love and His joy. And there was things that there was a connection being made. We're making a relationship, and we had somebody that they said, it's interesting because he is more against us getting caught into religion than we are. And so this girl we were talking to she was saying, sometimes Father will come along and just say, man, I love how you're just connecting with me right now, and I love how you're getting into this routine, and we're having such great time, but I don't want you to get caught in religion, so I'm going to take this away, and you're going to have to seek me another way. I don't want to, but it's more important for me not to let you get caught into religion or something, and it's like, it's so hard, but He wants the best for us, but I was really challenged by that statement, and at service level I was laughing about it, but I was also like, man, it's so true, but
yeah, I've been there so many times. Like I would be having some what I thought were amazing quiet times, and I'd be going so deep in my mind and like during my study and stuff, and I just like, oh man, I'm getting it, and then all of a sudden, like my time situation changed, and I wasn't able to do that. Like time, I just didn't have the time anymore, miraculously, and and it meant actually during that particular season, the one I'm thinking about, it meant no quiet time, and it was just, and like later on, like I reeled it in and backed it up, and I was like, what the heck happened there? And like the Lord kind of told me, He's like, yeah, I totally took that from you, because you were getting, like, number one, super prideful, and like number two, like you weren't there for me, like you were there for you, and like I was just like, oh man, So I've been there. It's interesting. So
That's awesome. How much time do we have?
Say hi to
I didn't see where
I
we're
have
at.
no idea when we actually started. We've probably been going over like around 30, 40 minutes right now, maybe. Somewhere
Okay.
around there.
This might be a good place to wrap up if anyone has any concluding thoughts, I think.
Yeah, no, like I just maybe this is a good one for next time. But like the whole pride thing is very interesting to me. And I think there's two sides to it. There's obviously, like, there's actually probably more sides than that, but there's like the pride of just like thinking you have it together, thinking like, and just like all the pitfalls that come from that. And then it's just like, as you're learning truth, like, how do you not be the prideful guy and try to, like, when someone doesn't agree with you, or they're not, like, maybe like getting something that you really feel like the Lord showed you or something, like, what do you do? How do you handle that and all that? And so I don't know, maybe we can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm thinking like application, right? Like I drive everything in my own life, I drive it back, okay, what does that mean? How do I change? What is that? How does that impact me? What do I need to do with that? If it's true, what do I need to do with it? And so I'm even thinking like a great place to start on that maybe next time is think through, like, what have our lives looked like? At what points in our life, did we realize pride was getting in there, or whatever, and how did Father, either discipline us or wake us up to that, and how did He pull us in? And maybe what can others do too? Like, I think, in terms of my own life, sometimes I pray because I know, like, the pride would say we even have visibility on our weaknesses, right? Like we'd say, I know where I'm weak and I need to just pray a little more or be a little more disciplined or whatever, and I'll overcome those weaknesses. But I think the true prayer of humility is, Father, I don't even know what some of my weaknesses are. Show me. Show me how I'm offending you in my life. Are there things that I'm doing that dishonor you, that you don't like? When you look at me, Yahweh, are there things that make you cringe? Are there things that you have to look away from? And show me those things, because those are the most dangerous things, the things that we don't even know we've harbored in our lives, in our decisions, or in our past, and we haven't dealt with, whatever that is. And so that's a powerful prayer, and he will answer that prayer, and it's scary. It's a scary prayer. But if we really want to have and allow Him to clean us up, and because ultimately that's what it's about. I mean, He can't dwell with impurity, and the reason He wants to refine us is so that He can dwell with us. And so if we want the fullness of His presence, we've got to go through that. Like, there's just no way around it. We can't. Even if we're not aware of stuff, we can't let that stuff continue in our lives. And so that's like one thing, but I can think of specific times it'd be fun to kind of unpack that a little bit together and just say, hey, where did pride get in our lives? What are some of our testimonies of how fathers use situations, experiences to expose those things in our lives? And then how do we get through that? How did He bring us through? What did we learn from that? That might be really interesting.
Yeah. And where is He still working on that? It's
absolutely
that continual refinement. So it's always there. But man, that prayer is radical. It's great, because I think yeah, that's the pride. We believe that we can please God by what we think makes Him happy, and are we really willing to pray that? That'll show where our heart's at, which is interesting. So that was good. I think this was good. You guys ready to wrap?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, I'm ready. We could jump into the next session right now. Like, let's keep going. But no, we've set a good a good boundary there. So I think it would be great. Let's wrap it and have lots to look forward to next time.
Cool. Yeah, if you're listening and you want to submit a question, ask at neversettle.it. And thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, blessings.
Blessings.